Okay, I think we've had a chance to let the kids get out now. Um, so we'll just pull back together. I hate to interrupt, when people are connecting with each other. So I was thinking back when I was much younger, and my daughter, not my daughter who comes to the church, or my oldest daughter, once she figured out how to read, she was voracious. She read everything. So I can't remember how old she was, maybe 10 years old. And she came to me and she said, Dad, I'm reading through the Bible and I'm getting a little bit lost. I was wondering if you would read it with me and help me out. And it's like, just what every father wants to hear, right? I was very young and somewhat foolish at the time. And I said, yeah, let's do this. And where you started? Well, I started at the beginning, of course. Genesis, yeah, let's go. So, the Bible is not exactly PG all the time. This had kind of slipped my mind at the time. It's not like a Disney fairy tale. Disney cleaned up the grim fairy tales that were much more grim. But it's not like that. And it's kind of cool that it isn't, because we don't outgrow it when we become adults. It's not, what we do with kids is we take the stories and we pick and choose which ones, because stories are easier than other things. Maybe we'll give them a verse or two from Psalms or the Ten Commandments, but mostly we stay with stories. We skip ones that are really more difficult, and we sanitize the ones we tell them so that it goes easier. And this is not wrong. This is good because they're kids, right? But if that's all we have when we get to be adults, is our child Sunday school lessons in our mind. Yeah, I know the Bible. I remember David and Goliath, and there was a creation story and a flood, right? If that's all we have, then we're missing out on so much that God wants. He wants us to dig deeper. Rich Mullins said, the Bible is not a book for the faint of heart. It is a book full of all the greed and glory and violence and tenderness and sex and betrayal that benefits mankind. And that's a bit of a cut. You see where that dash is? He said more, but, we'll cut his quote to that. So I was reminded last week that we really need to dig into our Bibles. And we need to be encouraged to go there. Just like Marlo said, you go to Costco and you have the samples. I'm not with Marlo on this. I'm okay with going around 6 times, okay? Whatever it takes. But if you really want to get it, you have to buy it and you have to dig in. And it's like that. On Sunday morning, sermons are just the samples, and we got to dig into the Bible. So I would invite you to turn with me to Genesis 38. And we're going to pick up our story from last Sunday. So the story of Joseph and his brothers, everybody knows Joseph and his brothers and the fight. It's really more of a story of Joseph and Judah. And we see that Judah is the ringleader in this whole thing, and Joseph is interacting more with Judah. And so after Joseph is sold into slavery, then instead of following along with what happened to Joseph, the Bible pauses to look at what was Judah doing all this time that Joseph is down in Egypt. And it follows his story in chapter 38, and then it comes back to Joseph and Potiphar and all that. And so today we're going to go and we're going to look at that story and the contrast between Judah and an amazing woman, Tamar. And so I'm going to read through this, and we're just going to sort of see what God was doing. Now, one of the things that the Bible does, a lot of times, it just gives you the facts. This happened, this happened, this happened. And if you want to know what God's opinion of it is, you got to dig deeper. And I think that's on purpose, to make us really dig. And so I'm going to go into some things that I see from digging a little deeper than just the story, and I'll tie back into those verses where I'm getting that from. But I am going to go into what I think made Tamar tick, and what Judah was feeling. Well, Judah is a little easier to understand, but Tamar, you have to dig a little deeper to see what was going on in her life. And whenever you look in between the lines, you want to be careful, right? When we come to the Bible, we come in reverence and we say, okay, whatever I know, I can't find something in between the lines that contradicts it or is different, right? So I will give you where I've come with my ideas from as we look at Tamar and we see what she was doing in the life of Judah. So I'm just going to start at verse 1, chapter 38 of Genesis. And it says, at that time, Judah left his brothers, and he went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. So this is just after he's sold out his brother, and he's feeling all the guilt and remorse, and he just basically sends himself into exile. There, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua, and he married her, and he made love to her, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. And she gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. I'm saying it's Shelah because Sheila just sounds wrong for a guy's name. And I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, but we'll go with Shelah. And it was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Now, Judah got a wife for So think about this. We're going ahead a lot of years now. We've just jumped forward. And this is a very short time frame for this story to happen in. We've got about 22, 23 years between when Joseph goes to Egypt and when the brothers are going to go down looking for grain. And all of this happens within that. So this is a young man. And his father Judah goes and gets him a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and so the Lord put him to death. That verse right there has kept me up many nights because I like to know the whole story. How was he wicked? What did he do? How did God put him to death? When he died, how did they know it was God and then he didn't just have a heart attack or something? Like, give me some details. So, I ponder things at night and your brain doesn't turn off. And I'll lie there. Well, okay, usually I just fall asleep. But I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll just be thinking, so I wonder what it looked like when God put him to death. I wonder what he did. Now, what I have noticed from the Bible is when God starts something new, there's a kind of a settling in period where God is very serious that the thing will get off on the right foot. So when Moses first put in the Sabbath, and he said, the Sabbath day will be holy, there's no work to be done on it. The first person who broke the Sabbath went out gathering firewood. And they said, what should we do? And God said, stone him. And he was killed for gathering firewood on the Sabbath. Now, lots of people broke the Sabbath after that. And they didn't get that same punishment. But it was the beginning, the inauguration of it. And God is saying, I want you, when you think about what the Sabbath means, and when you learn later how Jesus is our Sabbath, and it's this promise of heaven and entering to rest, I want you to be able to look back at how serious this was. And people say, well, that's the mean God of the Old Testament, right? New Testament God would never do that. Ananias and Sapphira, right? They come in, everybody's selling property, bringing the money to the church, saying, hey, we want to support what's going on here. And so Ananias and Sapphira say, we want to get in on that. We have some property, we'll sell it. I don't want to give all that money. That's way too much. But I want the glory. I want them to think I did. So they bring half the money, and they say, here, we sold this property, and here's all the money. And boom, dead. God, the apostle says, why are you lying to the Holy Spirit? You're trying to take the glory that is God's. When you had the property, wasn't it yours? You could do anything you wanted with it. Once you sold it, all the money was yours. You didn't have to give any of it. But you're pretending like you gave it all and you're not ready to give all. And that's it. And then his wife comes in and they say, how much did you sell that thing for? And she repeats her husband's lie and bang, she's dead. That's God saying, this is important. I'm starting something new and it's going to start right. If you were to come and sell your car and say to Pastor Lucas, here's 10,000, it's everything I got from my car, and you really sold it for 20, you wouldn't die. But back then it was important that God was setting things up the right way. And so when I hit and I see that he was wicked, and I'm thinking, okay, we have the promise coming down from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now he has his 12 sons. This is the beginning of the tribes of Israel. This is the start of where things will go next, and Jesus is going to come from Judah. And I believe that when God puts to death, he's saying this is too important. And when I think about what did he do, and I won't know till I get to heaven in what way was he wicked, but I imagine that he was despising the promise. The promise that he would have known had come down to his father, the promise that through Abraham's seed all the world would be blessed. And I don't think took that serious. And he probably looked at his father and said, yeah, I've heard you, talking to your friends or to yourself or whatever. I know all about Joseph. I think he knew about Joseph. And I'll tell you why when we hit later on down what I think tells me that. But he despised that promise, I think. But in whatever case, he did something that was wicked, and God said, that's it, you're done. So now there's this whole cultural thing happening, because the world was not a safe place back then. People banded together in small groups in order to be strong enough to not be pillaged by other groups, right? And there were no big countries. If you had a city-state, that was the most you got. And so women by themselves, because women are typically weaker than men, not physically, just on average, they weren't safe. And you needed to be aligned in a group. I mean, anybody by themselves wasn't safe. You tried to keep families that were bigger and groups that were bigger in order to have any kind of security in the world. And so one of the things there was to have the connection with the family. And also, there was a sense of wanting to continue family lines. Family lines were very important. So there was this custom that if a woman died, if she died, then it's over. If the guy died and she hasn't had any children, then the next brother down would take her in as his wife, and she would have a son that would be counted as the older brother's son. So this is what's happening here. When we get to verse 8, it says, Then Judah said to Onan, Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law and raise up offspring to your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So you had 3 brothers. When they died, the inheritance would be split 4 ways. And the oldest brother would get a double portion. So would get 50%, Onan 25%, and Shelah 25%. And now is gone. So now there's 2 brothers. It splits 3 ways, and Onan is in for 2/3. He's going from 25% to 2/3. And I'm the primary inheritor. I'm the big shot of the family after Dad dies, of course. And I don't want to give my brother a son because he will take my place. And so Onan knew the child would not be his. So you can read that verse. We'll move on because there are still a few kids in the audience, right? So he would not allow her that place in the family of having that son. And it says in verse 10, what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight also. So the Lord put him to death. Now I imagine that he put him to death the same way so that everybody would know, hey, this is, continuation. He despised the heritage that was in the family and his brother's place, and he was greedy and wanted it all. And God said, no, we're not doing that either. So there at least we know what his exact wickedness was, right? So then Judah gets in here, and Judah has a bit of a fear. So Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So he is concerned. Judah has fallen so low. He knows his family's out of control. He knows his first two sons were wicked. He's not saying they weren't. He's concerned that so is his third son. And if she marries him, the same thing could happen, and he could be without all of his sons. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Now, of course, he's a much younger guy, so kind of makes sense. Okay, I'll wait a year or two. We'll see until he's grown up, and then I'll marry him. And then, verse 12, after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. I imagine Judah right now. He's put himself in exile because of the guilt and the shame in his own life. His oldest son died. His middle son died. Now his wife has died. And he's going, God is punishing me because I took away a son from my father by selling him into slavery. And we know that when the sons, all of the sons go down to Egypt and they're talking amongst themselves, they don't think Joseph understands them. They say, man, this is happening because of what we did. It was the first place they go. This is God's punishment on me. Judah is at a very, very low point. Not the lowest point. He hasn't hit rock bottom yet. You know, sometimes in our life we hit these things where we go, man, I have blown it. I think I'm a failure. And God says, you know, I want to restore you. You've blown it, but I want to restore you. But you don't see that because you're so focused on how you have failed. And so this is where Judah is. And then it says he's going to sink lower. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, I kind of like that word when I get it right, the Adullamite, went with him. And then Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep. And she took off her widow's clothes. She covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. And then she sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that although Shelah had grown up now, she had not been given to him as a wife. So she knows, I'm not getting back in. Now, what does Tamar want? She wants her place in the family, but I believe that Tamar knew of the promises to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah. And she wants in on the promise. She is chasing after God. And she wants to be in that family. Now, why do I say that? Because that's not in the text here. Well, one thing I know about her from Matthew 1:3 is she's in the genealogy of Jesus. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. You know what you have to do to get into a genealogy as a guy? You have to have a kid. That's it. You're in. You're in the genealogy. You have a son, and that son has a son. For a woman to get into a genealogy back in that day, they didn't, ever. Jesus has 5 women in Matthew listed in his genealogy. I look at that and go, wow, God cares about all of us, right? And he's not a respecter of persons. And even though the culture would say, well, why would you list women? You got Tamar, and then you get Rahab, and then Ruth, and then Bathsheba, and then Mary, all in Jesus's genealogy. That to me is massive. That is huge. And it is a complete affirmation of who she was. If she had been just, going through life and wanting to get a kid or married into a family that would take care of her, she would not be in the genealogy. That speaks tons to me about her character and her spiritual pursuit of God. So that's one of the reasons I think she was going after that. And then I do believe she knew about the promise to Abraham, and I'll come back to that a little bit later on with one other key or hint that we get in the text. So she knows that she's being robbed of her rights right now. And she has this idea that if she pretends to be a prostitute, now look, think about this. She knows how far Judah has fallen. She's not chasing after Judah, she's chasing after God. And she picks a way that culturally is probably more understandable to them than us, but she decides, I'll trick him, and then he'll give me the son that I want. That will establish my place. Now, this is not, in our culture, sometimes people are together and then maybe the guy doesn't want to commit and the girl says, well, if I have a baby, then he'll have to marry me and commit. This is not that. This is absolutely not that. This is her saying, I deserve to be in this family and I'm being held back, so I'm going to go to the source and find my way back in, and I'm chasing after God. I mean, she doesn't get the man. At the end of the story, she doesn't get the man. That's not what she's after. Okay, so when Judah saw her, so here he sinks lower. He thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you, she asked. And he says, I'll send you a young goat from my flock. And she said, okay. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it? I need some security here. And he says, what pledge would you have? And she says, your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand. So he gave them to her, and he slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. This is like asking for your driver's license and your visa. Give me your driver's license and your visa. You'll get them back when I get the goat. He had turned his back on everything that God had promised him. And now symbolically, he gives up his whole identity, gives it to her. It's easy to get lost in life sometimes. And God has put an identity and a calling on us, and we can turn away from it and walk away from that. And so here we see Judah absolutely abandoning all that he has been called to. He gives away his seal and the cord and then the staff. It's all these things that say this is Judah. And he just despises that whole thing. He's so done with himself, but he hasn't turned yet to God for the forgiveness that he needs. So now he's at an incredibly low point in this 20 years plus, but he's not at the bottom yet. So then we pick up in verse 19. It says, after she left, she took off her veil and she put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he didn't find her. He asked the men who lived there, where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enium? And they said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. So he went back to Judah and he said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. And then Judah said, well, let her keep what she has or we'll become a laughingstock. After all, I tried, right? I did send the young goat, but you didn't find her. You're trying to do things kind of on the down low here. We're not trying to, broadcast to the whole world. Oh, I got to get this payment over to, So when he can't find her, it's like, okay, just stop. This is bad enough already. Let's pretend it never happened. But now he has lost all of these things for good, he thinks. Whatever happened to her, she's gone. I can't get my stuff back. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she's now pregnant. And Judah said, this is where he hits his lowest, rock bottom. Bring her out and have her burned to death. They always say we have to hit rock bottom before we turn and look back to God. And we all have our own bottom. Some people can just kind of glance over the pit and go, yeah, I'm not going down there. That's what we want, right? That's what we want for all our kids. Just look and turn to heaven. Judah went all the way down before he hit his bottom, and he said, that's it. He's lost his wife, his oldest son, his middle son, and now the family honor, whatever was left of it, he's sleeping around with prostitutes, and the honor, because this, Tamar, horrible Tamar, has gone off and done this thing, and he's going, well, I didn't even want her to marry my youngest son in case he died too, but now she's dishonored him, and just kill her horribly, burn her to death. So when you read the Bible, some people say, well, see, this is so evil. That's why I don't trust the Bible, because it tells you to do evil things. Well, it records evil things that happened. It doesn't say they're good. But Tamar is about to deliver him. She is going to be the hand of God in his life to bring him back, and not only him, but the whole family of God at that time. So it says in verse 25, as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I'm pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. And this is critical right here. And this is why I believe she knew all about the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because she knew about Joseph. When the brothers came back to Jacob, and they had Joseph's coat with all the blood and ripped up, and they didn't want to lie to him, but they weren't going to tell him the truth. They said the Hebrew for it is hakerna. Hakerna. Examine this, I pray you. Or please, examine this, please. See if you can tell whose it is. And she says exactly the same thing. Hakerna. Examine these. Can you tell whose they are? Right to his heart. It brings back everything to him about what he has done and why he is there and what she's looking for. And so if she knew that, I figure she knows all the family secrets. I mean, she's been married to 2 of the sons already for a period of time. They're talking, right? So Judah recognized them, it says in verse 26, and he said, she is more righteous than I. Talk about an understatement. Since I wouldn't give her to my son. And then it says he didn't sleep with her again. This is the thing that pulled Judah out. You see, he sees her pushing forward for everything that he has turned his back on. And she is going all out. She risked her life, and she knew she was risking her life in order to push on to God. And he's just been 23 years now, 22 years, trying to get away from God because he can't face himself. And I believe this is the point where he turns, and it's a huge change, and we're going to see it later in a minute, but he is now coming back, and he's saying, she's more righteous. That's what I'm supposed to be. And then the story with her finishes in the rest of the chapter. Because we've read this far, we should do the last 4 verses. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. And as she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, this one came out first. But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, oh, so this is how you've broken out. And he was named Perez, which means breaking out. And then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. Scarlet means scarlet or brightness. So she has twins. Now the first one born, Perez, counts as Judah's firstborn. He replaces Ur. The second one born counts as the 4th son, comes after Shelah, because of the whole Levirate marriage thing. So this is now the line that will come down to Christ through Perez. So she has been given her place in history and held up as an example for us to press into God. Now, what happens next is Judah goes back home. Because we know, because the timeline on this is so short, because it says very clearly how old Joseph was when he goes to Egypt and how old he is when he goes into Pharaoh's service and everything. So we know the timeline pretty much exactly. So the very next thing, he has to go home. And then the brothers are going to go down to Egypt. And of course, the first time they go down, Joseph sees them. He keeps Simeon there and says, bring back Benjamin. Otherwise, you don't bother coming at all. And they're all freaked out by that. And then in Genesis 43, verse 8 and 9, it's Judah. Like Reuben tries and kind of fails to appease his father. But then in verse 8, it says, then Judah said to Israel, his father, Jacob, Israel, send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. Huge change from hiding, from running. Now he's back and taking responsibilities. I'll take care of Benjamin. Don't worry about it. I got him. I've got this for you. So they go back, and of course, Joseph is still testing them, right? So Simeon goes back, and all the 11 brothers are together, and they leave, and Joseph puts his silver cup into Benjamin's grain sack, and then accuses them of stealing it, and brings them all back. And you get this long explanation from Judah to Joseph in chapter 44, but I'll just pick up a few verses. Verse 16, Judah says, what can we say to my Lord? Judah replied, what can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. He understands. This is from God. And he doesn't think Joseph even understands that phrase, God has uncovered your servant's guilt. He just knows that there's a guilt there's a debt that has to be paid. We are now my Lord's slaves. We are ourselves and the one who was found to have the cup. And Joseph says, far be it from me to do that. I'm not taking all of you. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. And then Judah goes into this big, long pleading, going over the history. Well, we came and we said this, and you said this, and this happened, and that happened. And he gets to the end, your servant, verse 32, your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please, let your servant remain here, for as my Lord's slave, and in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. So he has now put himself, and all he knows is if I'm successful, I'm a slave for life. The exact same thing that he sent Joseph to be. Benjamin gets home. The next verse in chapter 45, verse 1, it says, then Joseph could no longer control himself. Joseph was aware of all that had transpired when he was being sold, right? He knew that, the brothers he had pleaded with them and begged them, it said in an earlier chapter. And he knew that Reuben was trying to save him, and he knew that Judah was the ringmaster behind selling him. Absolutely, he knew that. And he was wanting to test all the brothers for sure, but he was testing Judah. If Judah had not come up and said, I'll take his place, they may not have ever reconciled. Joseph may have said, no, I haven't learned anything. Send him out. I don't care. And it was Tamar changing Judah's heart that brought the family back together so that they could all be going down and become a nation in Egypt. Now, they had hard times to come in Egypt, before they would be a nation, but this was the beginning. And it was because of this amazing woman's faith that could happen. It reminds me, in Romans, it talks about the Gentiles coming to faith and the Jewish people rejecting their Messiah, right? And so in Romans 11, verse 11 and 12, it says, "So I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean?" This is what we look forward to, right? The day when the Jewish people are coming back to the Lord as well, and we are all one in Christ. We're grafted in, as was said earlier today. He inhabits our praise because we're grafted in. But we're wanting them all back. Well, Tamar was the first Gentile to provoke a Jewish person to jealousy. She provoked jealousy in Judah, who said, she's going after what should be mine. And this is how we're to live our life as Christians, is to provoke those around us to jealousy, that they would look at us and they would glorify God. And they'd say, man, I want what he has. I want what that person has. The gospel is very narrow. We get in trouble with this in our culture all the time because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. But it's not just narrow. It says God showed his love to the world in this, that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes. There is an exclusive inclusivity in the gospel. We are all coming to the same God, but we have to come through Christ. And our life should be lived in such a way that people look at us like Tamar and they say, oh yeah, I want that. They're pushing in for a God that I don't get, and I don't understand why, but it gives them a peace. It gives them a confidence in life. It gives them the way to go forward. So do we want to be like the Judah in the exile, a self-imposed exile, or do we want to be like Tamar, calling him back? Our life should be like Tamar, a woman of faith and one to set our sights to. Press in no matter what it costs. Get our Bibles, read, find out what God wants for us. Take it all. Like, she had hardly any knowledge of God, just a little bit, and she pressed in on it. We have the entire Bible. How much more should we press in? Anyway, I encourage you with that, and hopefully you won't be scared off by the awkward passages, even if you have to skip a verse or so. Anyway, God bless. Jesus, I just want to thank you that you love us. You call us back when we've turned away, and you have more for us than we can even imagine, and you want us to press in so that others would see our good works glorify the Father in heaven. They would come to us. They would say, I want what they have. Amen.